There's an old expression that says, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. It probably wasn't referring to microbes, which have long been more feared than revered, but perhaps it should have been. Ed Yong is staff science writer for The Atlantic magazine and the author of I Contain Multitudes, The Microbes Within Us and a Grander View of Life. And he joins us now from Washington, D.C. to explain what microbes are and why they're an indispensable part of each of us. Ed, it's good to have you on TVO tonight. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Not at all. Let's start with just some basic science 101 here. The difference between microbes, germs, and bacteria. What's the difference?
Okay, so microbes are small living things that are so small you can't see them with the naked eye. You'd need a microscope or something similar. Bacteria are a type of microbes. They're extremely common. They are the most common living things on the planet. And germs is really just a pejorative term for all of these organisms. And it reflects the fact that for the longest time we have seen them as villains, as causes of disease, as things that are going to kill us. So we call them germs. But that point of view is very misleading because the vast majority of them are benign or in fact beneficial to us.
There is a quote from your book that I want to put to you now and have you explain what this means, because you write, it's commonly said that the average person contains 10 microbial cells for every human one, making us rounding errors in our own bodies. What exactly do you mean by that?
So actually that stat is commonly cited in pretty much everything that's said about the microbiome in talks and books. But as I explain in I Contain Multitudes, it was based on figures that were sort of pulled out of the air, like very back of the envelope calculations. In fact, the most recent estimate suggests that the ratio is like 1 to 1. So we'll have roughly one bacterial or microbial cell in our bodies for each of our own human cells. Now that's still a lot. It means that half the cells that are in our bodies are in fact belong to other organisms. And I think it reflects just how important microbes are in our cells and in our lives.
Why is that not problematic for our human cells to be outnumbered?
It's not problematic because those microbial cells, far from causing disease or causing us harm, are in fact really important for our lives. They help to digest our food, they help to build our organs, they craft and calibrate our immune systems, and they actually protect us from disease rather than causing it. So they aren't just, they aren't doing us any harm, they aren't even just stowaways or hitchhikers. They are a critical part of ourselves, just like another organ, as essential to us as our stomachs or our livers, but composed of a multitude of other living things.
Okay, continuing our Science 101 here, and this time a person of interest. Who was Anthony van Leeuwenhoek?
He was a Dutchman who was the first person in all of history to see microbes with his eyes and to understand that they exist. He did this in 1675 and he did it with microscopes that he invented himself and that were the most powerful microscopes around of the day. And he turned them onto all sorts of things in the world around him, including drops of water from canals and pots outside his house, and everywhere he looked, he saw multitudes of living things, just countless swarms of little organisms that no one had ever seen before. And those were bacteria, microbes, and Leeuwenhoek was the first person to ever realize that they actually existed.
If he was so big, how come we haven't heard of him?
He's actually quite big news in microbiology circles. He's very famous as a scientist, but he was also not a traditional scientist. He wasn't a scholar of any kind. He was a civic servant, and a lot of his discoveries and his ideas sort of faded with the man himself, because for the longest time people didn't realize that microbes were so essential to us. They were ignored for a long time. And then they were vilified because people realized that they were in fact the cause of so many infamous diseases like tuberculosis or leprosy or cholera, and so they became known as germs. Those things that we should fear and destroy lest they destroy us first. And only more recently have we started to understand just how essential they are for our bodies, for our lives, for our health.
We're going to put a picture up right now, and I hope you can't see it, but you know what it is. It kind of looks like, well, it's a little hard to describe what it is. You want to tell us what it is?
Yeah, so it's Leeuwenhoek's microscope, right? So it looks a little bit like a glorified door hinge, is how I describe it in the book.
Exactly.
So what he's done is he's created a very, very perfect spherical glass lens, which you can't really see in the image, but he then sandwiches that between these two brass plates that you can see. And that's his microscope. The rest of the stuff that you're looking at in the image are just armatures for mounting things in front of that lens. So he would have grabbed this thing and held it right in front of his eye, and he would have needed to look at things like in front of an open window, so sunlight was sort of pouring down through the lens onto this object, and that's how he used his microscope. It's a very different thing to what we think of as microscopes today, but that seemingly innocuous object was capable of magnifying objects about 10 times better than anything else around at the time, and that's what allowed Leeuwenhoek to peer into this unseen world that no one else had seen before.
Okay, no disrespect to Leeuwenhoek, but I suspect more people have heard of Charles Darwin than Leeuwenhoek, so I want to ask you about Charles Darwin's work and how that has affected our attitude towards microbes.
Well, so Darwin was arguably one of the greatest biologists of all time. The theory of evolution by means of natural selection is the thing that grounds our understanding of the natural world to this day. But when it first came out, it created the sense of the natural world as one of intense conflict and competition. And there is certainly truth in that. But I think it stopped people from understanding a lot of the beneficial sides of nature, the cooperations that we see between different organisms and between hosts and the microbes that they carry. And because of germ theory, because of realizing the microbes were germs, and because of the rise of Darwinism, I think people saw the microbial world as a source of conflict with us, and we ignored the beneficial side for a very long time.
Let's do another quote from your book here. The traditional view of the immune system is full of military metaphors and antagonistic lingo. We see it as a defense force that discriminates self, our own cells, from non-self, microbes and everything else, and eradicates the latter. I wonder what your take is on all of this, these military analogies that are used to describe what's inside us.
I think they are very misleading because actually we know that microbes help to craft some parts of the immune system. They stimulate the growth of some immune cells, and they actually set the balance of the immune system so it is reactive against infectious threats, but not overreactive to harmless and benign things in the world around us like dust or pollen. And so microbes actually help to build and tune the immune system. And in return, the immune system, far from just wantonly destroying microbes, actually helps to select for them. It keeps them in the right parts of our bodies, and it selects which strains and species get to live alongside us. So I think a better metaphor is like a set of rangers in a national park whose job it is to care for the residents of the park and to ensure that their population levels are in check and to chuck out invasive species should they show up.
So we'll ditch with the military lingo for now and we'll go with the more biological one, which sounds much sweeter coming from you anyway.
Right, more like managing an ecosystem.
Gotcha. Let's put a little controversy on the table here, and we'll talk breastfeeding. Before I get to the controversial question, let's just start with this. The role that breastfeeding plays in the development of the human microbiome. How do you see it?
So breast milk contains, some 10% of breast milk contains these very complex sugars that babies can't actually digest. Those sugars are there to nourish microbes in a baby's gut. And in particular, some strains, like one called B. infantis, that have evolved to digest those sugars with incredible efficiency. And when it does that, it releases substances that nourish a baby's gut cells, that seal up the lining of the gut, and that reduce inflammation. So actually, I think a breastfeeding mother, rather than just nourishing an infant, is actually building this entire world inside her baby's body, this microbial world that then sets up the baby for good health later on in life.
I want to follow up by asking you about HMOs, and I'm not talking health management organizations. I'm talking human milk oligosaccharides, which I had never heard about until looking at your book. So start by telling us what those are.
Well, so those are the complex sugars that I was just talking about. Those are the components in breast milk that nourish microbes inside the baby's gut.
And do we know what the impact is if you don't get those HMOs from the mothers, or the impact on the babies if they're not breastfed?
So we certainly see changes in a baby's microbiome. Different species are dominant if a baby isn't breastfed or doesn't get those HMOs. Now, what that means in the long run is unclear. If we look at adults who were breastfed and bottle-fed as babies, you don't see any lasting differences in their microbiome. So certainly those early differences shake out over time. Now, the big question then becomes whether those temporary differences lead to lasting influences on a baby's health, on a person's health. And we don't know the answer to that yet. And it's worth pointing out that some women naturally produce a lower diversity of those HMOs because of their own genes. It's not to say that if you don't breastfeed your children, you're going to be courting disaster because of you're setting them up with a different microbial community. But there are differences, and that is something that scientists still need to investigate.
All right, let's talk veggies. Are humans, in your view, microbially suited to be vegetarians?
Oh, certainly, and in fact, it's probably not a bad idea. So I'm vegetarian myself, and eating a diet that's rich in plants and that is rich in fiber is a very good way of nourishing a diverse community of microbes inside your gut. Fiber consists of a complex range of carbohydrates, and no single species of microbe has all the right cutlery to digest all of these nutrients. So if you eat a diverse range of fiber, diverse range of plants, you nourish an equally diverse range of microbes. And that seems to be generally a good thing. A diverse ecosystem is a resilient one. When microbes break down fiber in plant foods, they release substances that seem to be good for the gut, that nourish the gut and that reduce inflammation and more.
Another definition, please. Probiotics are what?
Probiotics are products that supposedly contain beneficial microbes that have been linked to all kinds of health benefits.
And in the book, you describe them like a breeze that blows through two open windows. What are you trying to say with that metaphor?
Right, so people think the probiotics do a lot of good, but actually they're quite medically underwhelming. They seem to be good for treating some kinds of infectious diarrhea, but in the main, they don't do a lot of good for many of the health problems that they have been claimed to treat. And that's because these products don't contain microbes that are A-listers of the human body. They contain strains and species that were chosen for historical reasons because they are easy to grow and manufacture, not because they thrive and survive well inside the gut. And they are found in very low concentrations. So if you swallow these products, the microbes inside don't have much impact, and they certainly don't last. They either die or pass through, which is why I compare them to a breeze that blows through two open windows. They might rattle a few objects along the way, but they don't have any lasting impact.
So how did they get their great reputation for being so fabulous?
Well, that's a very good question. It doesn't seem that things need to be very medically powerful in order to get a good reputation, and so it is with probiotics. I think people want to believe that these products, because they contain good microbes, do us a lot of good, and they've been marketed very, very heavily, although there have been many recent clampdowns on the marketing claims that surround these products. I think the idea of taking beneficial microbes is a sound one and one that scientists are now pursuing very actively. But I think we need to get very much smarter and more savvy about which species we're using, how we get them to stick around in the gut, what we're going to feed them, and so on.
In which case, if let's do a 180 here and go from, I guess, your least favorite to favorite microbe, which is what?
It is a bacterium called Wolbachia, which doesn't actually live in the human body. It typically lives in insects and other arthropods, which are themselves the most diverse animal groups on the planet. And Wolbachia is found in something like 4 in 10 species of them, which makes it easily one of the most successful microbes in the world.
How is it being used to fight, for example, dengue?
So for the last 25 to 30 years, Australian scientists have tried to get Wolbachia inside a mosquito called Aedes aegypti, which spreads diseases such as dengue fever, yellow fever, chikungunya, and Zika. And they've been trying to do that because if Wolbachia gets inside this mosquito, it stops it from spreading the viruses behind those diseases. And Wolbachia is also very good at spreading through natural populations. It's very good at manipulating the sexual biology of its hosts, and so spreads very quickly. Which means that if you release a very small number of these infected mosquitoes into the wild, very quickly all the wild mosquitoes should carry Wolbachia and therefore be unable to spread these viruses that cause us so much harm.
Any concerns in those communities where the mosquitoes are being released?
Actually, no, there's been a lot of support for this approach, mainly because it's safe, it's not toxic. So unlike insecticides, which need to be resprayed all the time and are toxic, the Wolbachia-infected mosquitoes aren't. They also cause no ecological harms because you're not actually killing the mosquitoes, you're just stopping them from spreading diseases. And really importantly, the scientists behind this approach have invested a lot of time in engaging with local communities. So they've gone out and talked to people who will be in these areas where mosquitoes will be released. They've explained the science to them. They've asked them for their concerns and then specifically done experiments to try and address those concerns. So there's a lot of community outreach and a lot of buy-in. Then it's not like scientists sort of parachuting in saying, I'm going to fix your problems and then leaving.
Can that Wolbachia microbe be transferred to humans?
It can't. So Wolbachia doesn't infect humans, and there's no evidence whatsoever that it could cause us harm in any way.
Okay, let's in our remaining moments here talk about the impact that microbes may have over the functioning of our brains. And to do that, I want to read one last excerpt from your book here. We put such a premium on our free will that the prospect of losing independence to unseen forces informs many of our deepest societal fears. Our darkest fiction is full of Orwellian dystopias, shadowy cabals, and mind-controlling supervillains. But it turns out that the brainless, microscopic, single-celled organisms that live inside us have been pulling on our strings all along. Let's talk about this. Tell us about, and I hope I'm going to pronounce this properly, and if I don't, you'll fix me up here, Toxoplasma gondii. Am I saying that correctly?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And how that can control a rat's brain.
Okay, so Toxoplasma gondii is a parasite, a single-celled parasite that can only reproduce inside cats. And if it gets into another host, like say a rat or a mouse, it has ways of manipulating the animal so it gets into its final host, which is a cat. It actually changes the rodent's behavior so that rather than running away from the smell of cats, the very sensible thing to do if you're a mouse, it actually runs towards that smell and therefore is more likely to be eaten, and therefore Toxoplasma gets inside the host that it needs to. It's a great example of a parasite that manipulates the behavior of its hosts in order to get where it wants to. Now, you know, it's important to say that Toxoplasma is in humans as well. It has been linked to things like schizophrenia, but it's still unclear whether Toxoplasma is manipulating our behavior in the same way that it's doing to rats or mice. But many of the microbes in our bodies might be influencing the way we think as well, and not in a harmful parasitic way, but in just a very natural everyday one. Maybe they are changing our moods or our personality, aspects of our personality, our ability to deal with stress or anxiety. There are many experiments in animals showing that their gut microbes can actually change their brains and the way they think. And it seems entirely plausible that the same sorts of things are happening in our bodies and in our brains too.
Your referencing cats there makes me suspect that there are both cat people and dog people watching us right now. And I guess the question, therefore, is microbially speaking, what's better, dog people or cat people?
Okay, so there have been studies looking at the influence that pets have on the microbes of our homes. So, you know, a lot of people, because we fear microbes, would want their homes to be completely free of them. That's actually a bad thing. If we have microbial deserts, we are limiting our connection to the microbial world. And as I've said, we need microbes to help to protect our health, to train our immune system, and maybe a lack of connection to the microbial world sets us up for immune problems later on in life. It sets us up with twitchy immune systems that are more prone to allergies or inflammatory diseases. So we want microbes. And actually, if people have dogs in their homes, they are exposed to a wider range of microbes because dogs go outside and they track microbes in the environment into the home, and they sort of act as a conduit between our bodies and the wider world. Cats, for some reason, don't seem to do that, and no one's entirely clear why. Maybe they move about the world in a different way, and maybe cats are just weird and no one understands why cats do the things that cats do.
Uh-oh, you've just offended half our audience right now.
Sorry, folks.
You're just telling it like it is. All right, in which case, if microbes are good and we need them, what do the microbes inside of us, what are they telling us to do?
Well, it's not clear. We know from experiments with mice and rats in laboratories that if they have microbes in the first place compared to sterile rodents, or if they have certain strains or species of microbes, they behave differently. You can change a rodent's behavior, its ability to deal with anxiety or stress by giving them certain microbes. Now, what that means for us is unclear. We still need more human studies, but I think the point is that it's very likely that the microbes within us can change the way we behave. Maybe we might be able to alter our mental health or improve it by providing ourselves with the right strains or species somewhere down the line. And this is still very early days, still quite preliminary science, and something that we'll see coming out more and developing in the next decade or so.
If that's the case, and there's still far more to understand about this, I'm not sure this next question makes any sense, but it won't be the first time I've asked a question that didn't make sense. I'll ask it anyway. If microbes are telling us to do various things, does our body actually have to listen to those microbes?
Oh, that's a nice question. I think we need to understand that these organisms are actually just part of us. You know, we need to stop seeing them as other, as foreign things that are sort of impinging on our cells, like these dark, shadowy forces that are making us do things we don't want to do. They are actually just another part of our bodies and of our minds. Like all animals, from the earliest days of our kingdom, evolved in the context of microbes. And all of us watching this show grew up in the microbial world. Microbes were with us from the moment we were born, and they have shaped the way we have developed, the way we exist now, the way we think. This isn't something weird and strange, something we need to deal with. It is just life. That is life as we know it.
Ed, in our last minute here, I want to ask you one last thing, and that is, you know, science is vast, and you could be interested in any number of different things, but you've decided to plant your flag on this issue. How come?
For a few reasons. I think it is, you know, earlier in this interview I talked about how evolution is the underpinning of all of modern biology. And to an extent, microbiology is as well. We see that microbes influence the lives of humans and every other animal in ways that draw in fields like neuroscience and immunology, cancer biology, zoology, botany, all the world around us, all the living things we see and are familiar with, all the people we know are deeply and profoundly influenced by the microbial world. And if we don't understand that, we don't really understand ourselves. But I think it's also full of great stories, which is why I tried to write this book, to get those stories across. Microbes are kind of like the original underdogs. We have neglected and feared them, and now we're starting to appreciate them. Their story is a very subversive one. It tells us that the world around us is different to what we thought and what we thought we knew. And I think that sort of perspective shifting, game changing idea is really cool. It makes us see the world around us and ourselves in a different light. And that's what I hope that people who read I Contain Multitudes will walk away with.
Well, I got to hand it to you. You absolutely have brought it to life, and I want to thank you for writing I Contain Multitudes, The Microbes Within Us, and a Grander View of Life. Ed Yong, we look forward to reading further dispatches in the Atlantic magazine, and we're grateful you came on TVO with us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.